Cocaine Cowboys, the deadly rise of Ireland's drug lords. The live show is on sale now. We're on the road on February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman Theatre, and on Sunday 18th, we're back at Dublin's 3 Olympia. April takes us to Galway's Town Hall Theatre, Killarney's INEC, and Belfast's Waterfront Studios. Check mcd.ie or venue for ticket sales. They're kind of becoming typical scenes, these funerals of young gun victims. And, you know, we can hear on the bit of audio we have there, those motorbikes revving and masked youths on motorbikes brought Finglas village to a near standstill.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's part of a... It's part of a trend. Certainly the motorbikes is a relatively recent development. We've seen it at other funerals, notably James Whelan's funeral, who was also murdered in Finglas area. And we've seen it in other funerals. Some of the members, Graham Taylor, and some of the people who were killed on the N7 in controversial circumstances, to say the least. So it's I suppose a cultural thing. There's always been showy funerals in the underworld, I suppose. It is. I suppose it's shocking to people, but we've seen it over time, and of course, to other people, it's not shocking at all. It's a relatively harmless tribute.
Do they just get let go ahead, or is there any sort of policing around these funerals? I mean, you'd have to wonder.
Well, there was actually a lot of police there today. Yeah. We're recording on Wednesday, just after the funeral of Brandon Ledwidge. There was a lot of police today, but again, I suppose there's, you know, some young fellas doing a wheelie on a motorbike. Is it worth the police intervening in a highly charged...
The resources into that, what it would take to, you know, if they're arresting them or anything like that.
And also, there's certainly high tensions at these times. I mean, look, you can have a certain view of it. You know, is it?
I'm sure it's quite frightening for people who are in Finglas village, living in that area, and all the rest of it. I mean, those bikes are being revved. They look a little bit like scramblers. Yeah. They're being revved and they're being driven like that, and it is a danger, surely, to the public. Yeah, look, a street.
It is a danger to the public, and you know, look, it's a spectacle as well, I suppose, and that's the aspect of it, like that. You know, there are people attempting to make a spectacle by doing it as well. Like, it's a tribute, and
it's kind of like this. It goes back to the Mexican narcos, nearly, doesn't it? It's kind of like this, you know, this fallen martyr, their hero, their young hero who has died. Do they really understand the finality of death? I wonder. Some of those young guys that, you know, are on one side or the other of feuds. Do they really properly understand that that's it?
Well, I suppose they may understand it now if they've lost somebody really close to them. I think the problem is, do they understand it a couple of months ago, when there's steps that lead up to these things inevitably? I think there's devastation. I mean, there'd be devastation from the family. There may be that people regard this as a tribute and a sign of affection and loyalty. But, you know, the ultimate tragedy is that Brandon Ledwidge, as a young man, no doubt was facing charges relating to the drugs trade, but you're not talking multi-millions. And he is at the age of 23, is it 23? I think his life is over, and all of the other things that he could have done, he doesn't get a chance to do. And over what? Well, we do know there was a dispute with a local gangland figure, let's put it that way. You know, we also know that he'd been sucked into a certain life. into a certain world. And, ultimately that has played a role in his death. And
you see what happens is these young guys, 23, he could have been 8 years in the drug game,
yeah,
and they get ambitious
yeah,
because they know how to do it. They know where to buy, to buy from their wholesalers. They know the game, and they want to be in charge, or they want to make more money, or they feel that they have reached a point in their career, basically, that they're going to make a move now and they're going to take over a certain patch. Now, the kind of circles Ledwidge, we believe, was moving in, and the kind of crime he was involved in centres around, a big problem with crack cocaine in the vicinity of where he was shot. And there's, huge amount of complaints from people living in that area of there being open drug dealing going on from crack houses. And literally people are approaching all day long. They're putting the money in the letterbox and out comes the drugs.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's definitely been a feature of parts of Finglas, certainly under the Flashy gang. If Mr. Flashy, who was sort of an associate of the Killing Cartel, a young person who got rapidly rose up the ladder because of his association with members of the Killing Cartel. And, they in particular were running these, what was sometimes described as open drug supermarkets in certain parts of Finglas. They had houses that were heavily fortified. Those houses were boarded up, CCTV, and a lot of they were focusing on selling out of that. The guards would raid them, but they'd find it hard to get in because of obstructions that were put in place. Now, the Flashy gang is not what it once was, but that business still goes on.
And that same sort of, doing business in that way.
Yeah, that
mode. So, of course, do you remember on that documentary we talked about the guards?
Yeah.
When they arrived, they were going to raid a house and they had to get in quick because there was a fire lit in the living room, and it was lit 24/7 every single day of the year. And it was there in case there was a raid and they just throw all the drugs on the fire.
Exactly. And there's other ways to do it, involving spotters and picking location, where like a lot of estates, there'd be maybe one way in and one way out, and there's a certain amount of you have a bit of they can't get at you quickly,
This is the lower level of cocaine, really, isn't it?
This is the low. But if you looked at that program, The Guards, or I think it was Inside the K, wasn't it originally?
Originally was called that, and then it changed to The Guards.
It changed the name, but it was broadly in the same area. And you see some of that, just that open drug dealing, and some of that in particular went on in Ballymun as well, and proved a major problem.
It's so corrosive to society, to the people who are living in the areas that, are trying to go out, do a day's work, rear their children. It's corrosive to the streets. It's corrosive to the children that are looking at it. And of course, you have people taking crack cocaine are by and large poly drug users with major addiction issues. And a lot of them will steal to get their fix. All of that comes with it.
All of that.
And then the whole community spirit is killed by it.
Yeah.
And you'd wonder we're very slow to evict anybody, aren't we? I noticed that, sometimes you can see some of these houses will be council owned.
Yeah. Well, look, there is issues around eviction, but a lot of people, of course, own houses as well. So that doesn't become an issue at all. It's, there's no simple problems. I think it
doesn't seem to be a tool used, though, in the instances when there is a council property that's been used.
Yeah,
for that kind of activity.
Yeah, I know that certainly with the Flashy headquarters, as it was called, there was a long and torturous history to try and bring that to an end. People have rights and they can defend them in courts. And, obviously as well, one of the other issues is that if you have a teenager living with you who becomes sucked into the drugs trade, do you kick the mother out? That may have other children. I think the biggest problem is young men getting sucked into this life, and they get to a point quickly where they can't get out, really. They also kind of get to a point that they seem to feel that they're bulletproof, literally, physically bulletproof. They don't care that life may be under threat. They are taking steroids. They're probably taking cocaine themselves.
and they're working out in gyms and they're building up their muscle and they're getting the girls and, they have the nice car if they have got to that stage and they've all the gear. And they just seem to think that, every day is there's going to be a next. But in the, we're looking in on it going, that guy has a row with a local criminal. He's probably going to get shot.
Yeah. I think, is that a feature of young men in general? Where they feel a bit bulletproof at a certain age, maybe around that age.
It probably is.
Now, and they feel bulletproof if you're in another environment, maybe you feel bulletproof in your job into the bank, or you feel bulletproof when you go and play rugby on the weekend. But
when you're doing those things, you're unlikely to come face to face with somebody holding a gun up to you.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's the problem is these young men are surrounded by that culture and they don't get a chance to make relatively harmless mistakes where they get drunk and don't go into work and maybe lose their job in a bank. So that is the problem. These young men are making mistakes. I know I'm being a bit compassionate, giving a different view, but like their mistakes are so costly, And like if, people that I knew when I was that age many, many years ago, they made mistakes at the age of 21, 22 and dropped out of college and went to whatever. But like these guys, the mistakes are hugely costly.
They're hugely costly to other people who have to live in the same communities as them as well.
Well, that's
and
true.
You have to kind of weigh up, can you just purely look upon them as, with compassion?
Yeah.
And, where does that leave people that have to send their kids to school, going past these crack houses, seeing these, addicted, sick people coming up to doors and getting their fixes? I mean, I know from work I've done in the past and from speaking to people in other areas that are affected by this, the kids are afraid. They're afraid. They say that the people in addiction look like almost zombies. They're afraid of them. They look scary. They're likely to probably grab their school bag or something if they need to make money for the next fix. And then, the guys who are dealing the drugs are coming out and brandishing guns and killing one another on the streets. I mean, it's a horrific way to have to live in any community.
It is. And of course, like, you're right. Like, the drugs trade functions because of the money there. But, an element that makes it different from other businesses, if you want, is that the threat of violence operates at all levels in it. So you can't be a good street drug dealer if you don't have the ability to threaten or inflict violence on people, to either make them pay up or to stop other things. Like, violence is inherently woven into it. So you don't, maybe at a very top level with like international drug dealers, in a funny way, they're just supplying drugs, but on a street level, violence is a part of it. So, if you say these are young men and they get sucked in, and that's true, but it's also true that they do terrible, terrible things. And then it's also true that they inflict this on the community, and it's also true that they are actually a part of that community, and their own parents maybe. I've talked to many parents whose sons they love, their sons that they say he's a lovely guy, he's a heart of gold, but he's after doing this terrible, terrible thing, and both things are actually true.
But in many cases, when you look at certain properties, for example, in areas that are being used for this kind of thing, and they've almost like inherited the family business when it comes down.
Look, it's actually in that program as well, they spoke about intergenerational crime, and how there are some groupings, these are relatively small groupings, where it goes through the generations, fathers, grandfathers, and then grandsons or sons as teenagers, and they're all playing a role in it. And that's definitely true. And then there are some parts of Dublin, which we know better, maybe true of other places, but I know it's true of Limerick as well. There's some estates that are built decades ago, and they have these little pockets of where it's very hard for the police to come in. There might be cul-de-sacs or park areas, very visible park areas where you can see the police coming from a few hundred yards.
Nearly built for what they became used for.
Yeah, but you see kind of in The Wire, I think, where you have these areas that are really, really difficult to police. And I know there was a couple of them in Ballymun, and a couple in Darndale that we get calls about, where like it's very difficult to stop it. If people are determined to do it, there's users who want to buy drugs. There's people who want to sell them. And what do you do, like, beyond,
But I mean, at risk of getting myself cancelled yet again, but, you know, like, if you have a family where it's coming down the lines, right?
Yeah.
Are those people, like, should those children be taken from them?
Who are you taking the children for? Like, so the problem with taking children is that children are going to be traumatized by it. So it might be a moral case for saying this child is being brought up in this environment, and there might be all sorts of good cases and good logic, but you're going to traumatize that child. That child loves their parents. That child is probably loved by their parents. You whip a child out of there and put it in a foster home, you're going to do untold damage, no matter how good the foster family are. So you really, like, that is the position we're in. And so, like, you can look at...
There's no right way with it, but it seems to me sometimes that, it's the parenting, obviously, that the kids are almost being encouraged to go out there and start dealing.
Well, I think it's there is a sort of...
it becomes normalised to them if people are calling to their door. And I know of many cases when the kids are sent to the door to shove the crack cocaine out because the parents are too lazy to even get up off a seat.
Yeah, I mean,
do the deal.
And look, so
toddlers and stuff, you know what I mean? It is really, really sort of
it's wrong,
chaotic and
wrong, and it's wrong. But it's whether the other option causes more harm. That's the complicated bit.
And has it been explored?
Well, I mean, it has over generations. I mean, people did these things in the past all over the world and ended up regretting doing it, if you know what I mean. Because, I mean, look, the state have passed the children's referendum, and the best interest of the child has to be paramount, not the best interests of society. In theory. I mean, in practice, this state doesn't care too much about kids. I mean, that's the reality.
Nor do we have the services
we don't.
for it. But
it
just is, I'm sure, if you're living there and watching it, it must be very hard to just say, oh, well, we should just let that continue. And,
No, you're right. Like, I mean, like, you're right. And the problem is that, like, that young guy there, Brandon Ledwidge, he was shot in his own front garden, at his own front door, in front of his family. He was facing charges, but they were charges of, a serious but relatively minor nature. That's going to have ripple effects of trauma, of problems for his family, for his friends. It's going to cause a threat of violence. The person who did it is, so everywhere.
And speaking of that, I mean, what is happening now with this? Is there heightened risk of retaliation? Is there two sides lining up? Is this another beginning of another feud? Is there likely to be more killings?
Well, I mean, we haven't seen... Well, we haven't seen much visible progress of the investigation. Now, no doubt there is progress being made. By that, I mean, there hasn't been any arrests. There seems to be a very clear suspect, a known criminal living in the general locality. Let's put it that way. There's a mixture of smaller drug gangs involved in the general drugs business in that area. And so I don't know if there's going to be retaliation. It doesn't seem to be lining up in that way. There is always a threat or a fear of it. But he seems to have been associated with a much younger group of people around him. And there seems to be maybe older groups who've been, involved over a long period of time in criminality, who at least somebody associated with them is the chief suspect for this murder. So,
but I mean, a show of strength there from the associates at that funeral. And I just read our own Patrick O'Connell covering it. He talks about the deafening sound of more than 24 motorbikes gunning their engines signalled the cortege's arrival before the motorcyclists entered ahead of it, with a number of drivers performing donuts and wheelies to signal its arrival. A short distance from the church, Ledwidge's coffin, a steel American-style casket, was removed from its glass carriage and carried aloft on the shoulders of a group of young men. With the motorcycles streaming ahead, a number of whom mounted the footpath at high speeds to get past the temporary traffic obstruction. The coffin bearers walked it a considerable distance to the church where his funeral mass took place.
Yeah.
So, you know,
yeah, it's not like...
I'm just not sure that that's okay to leave that go and to, you know, to allow people think that they can have that sort of display at a, you know, a funeral of a known drug dealer who was murdered in what was Ireland's first gangland murder this year, which is a good statistic, I suppose. But
well, I'm not saying they should, right? But would you want in the middle of that guy's funeral to have Gardaí go in with batons and whip people
they don't
off?
necessarily need to go in with batons, do they? I mean,
no, I know, but
the guys who have mounted the pavement speeding along in a pedestrian area where there's people trying to shop and probably bring their kids to and from school or whatever they're doing, you know, is it okay? Are we just too softly sometimes with these people?
Well, I don't know. And I mean, I suppose it feeds into, were we too softly with the build up to the rioters the other night? I mean, it's hard to say that we weren't a bit softly in that case. I mean, Finglas villages, you know, it's you know, there's a whole range of people there. Like there's a whole range of, there's a huge non-national population or proportion of the population there. So to them, it must seem, you know, what's going on. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. Are these displays acceptable? I mean, what is the role of the church in allowing these funerals to take place in the manner that they take place? Is another question. That
has been asked quite a number of times. And, you know, I think some in the past have come out, Dermot, I can't remember his second name, sorry.
Dermot Martin, the
Archbishop.
Martin, the former Archbishop. Yeah.
He came out very strongly against it. He was very brave, outspoken kind of member of the church, I thought. But then it seems to be left up to individual priests who, in fairness, must be a bit scared as well sometimes by this displays.
Yeah, might not be aware of everything that goes on around anyway, presumably, or is in the church. And, you know, and then again, people are entitled to a dignified burial no matter how they died. So, I've no answers. Is that what you could sum up my contribution to the podcast? I have nothing of value to say.
I told you need to take time off.
Do I?
Yeah, we do. All do. We all do. When you get to that stage that you have
no
yourself into no answer. Problem.
No. But I mean,
when you come into the office looking as I did today as well, I think it's sort of somebody should
sort of like
here.
Yeah.
I look like I was doing the garden.
Well, but you were doing the garden. So it's not.
I mean, seriously, when you're kind of on your way into the office and you realise you haven't changed out of your tracksuit bottom.
And for anybody who's listening to it on audio, you can actually log on to YouTube.
No, Clodagh's fixed the cameras. I've told him myself, you see.
Fuzz it up.
You can see is from here up.
Yeah.
And
you can't see the...
you can't see...
the sportswear.
Yeah, the sportswear below. But yeah, anyway, that's an aside. Well, look, I suppose we're not going to really get anywhere.
No, look, it's sad, like... You know, and I mean, it's very easy to say, look at them, they're a bunch of whatever, having a funeral like that. But like, I don't know if that's an answer either. Like,
well, it's sucking up further Garth resources even after.
It is, but I don't know if that's an answer
it's to. It's a very fair thing to say, I suppose.
No, it's not. Somebody's been killed, and they're gonna be loved by their family, and they're gonna have all the good qualities that are gone with them. And these young fellas are young fellas. So I'm not saying, you know, let people wheelie away for their, but, you know, I don't know if the answer is either to, you know, look down from a height.
I've had a bit of a rant today, haven't I?
Well, it's been balanced off by
it's been totally balanced by
my compassion and balance.
You always come out like the nice guy, do you know that?
It's because I am, Nicola.
I get a lot of messages from people telling me I'm too hard on you.
Yeah, and they're right.
Are they?
Yeah.
But you don't mind, do you?
No, I'm. Is it Stockholm syndrome where you start to?
I keep you locked in the studio, feed you every now and then, and just insult you.
Yeah, and I think it's normal.
You just think it's fine.
Yeah.
Right, listen, we'll talk later in the week.
Insult me later in the week, Nicola. Yeah?
Exactly.
Thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.